let's talk about saving for retirement. It's one of the biggest financial puzzles we all have to solve. But what if the game is rigged from the start for millions of people? What if the system itself is locking them out? Well, today we're diving into a huge debate about how to fix America's retirement savings crisis. And this number right here, this is really at the heart of the problem. About half, 50% of working Americans don't have access to a retirement plan at their job. Just let that sink in for a second. Half the workforce is essentially on the outside, looking in, unable to use one of the best tools out there for building up some savings for the future. So when you see a gap that big, you have to ask a really basic question. Isn't there a better way to do this? A way to make sure that everyone, not just people lucky enough to have a certain kind of job, gets a fair shot at saving for their future? Okay, so here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll look at the size of the problem, that savings gap. Then, we'll check out a government proposal to fix it. After that, we'll dig into a major critique of that idea, explore a totally different, much bigger vision, and wrap up with the two main paths we could take from here. All right, let's dive into our first section, the retirement savings gap. Like we just said, what we're really talking about here is a system where getting access to something as important as a 401k with an employer match, it's basically a coin toss. It all just depends on who you work for. So what do you do about a problem like that? Well, the Trump administration saw this was an issue, and they came up with a pretty specific idea to try and bridge that gap. And the idea, which was floated during a State of the Union address, was actually pretty simple on the surface. It was like, hey, if your job doesn't give you a savings match, don't worry, the government will step in. The plan was to match your contributions dollar for dollar up to $1,000 a year, to help out, as they put it, the oft-forgotten American workers. Okay, so how would this actually work? It's pretty straightforward. You, the worker, put some money into your own retirement account. Then the government comes in and matches what you put in, up to that $1,000 limit. And then that whole chunk of cash gets invested and hopefully grows in the market. The goal, right, is to level the playing field. But the big question is, does it really? And that question brings us right to our third section. Because, giving more people a match sounds great in theory. But an analyst named Carl Pulzer looked at this and asked a really important question. Who does a system like this actually leave behind? And this gets to the core of his critique. A matching program is awesome if you have money to put in. But think about it, for millions of workers living paycheck to paycheck trying to cover rent and groceries, there just isn't any extra money. And the bottom line is pretty simple. You can't get a match on money that you just don't have. So what you end up with is this kind of two-track system. For anyone who has even a little bit of extra cash to spare, this plan is a huge win. You put money in, you get a match, your savings grow. Fantastic. But for folks who have nothing left over at the end of the month, this plan doesn't do a thing. If you can't contribute, you get no match. You're still stuck on the outside looking in. So based on this whole analysis, Pulzer says any real reform, any plan that's actually going to work for everyone, has to pass two big tests. First, it's not enough to just match savings. You have to actually provide the money for people to save in the first place. And second, you've got to make sure these accounts are overseen by fiduciaries. These are professionals who are legally bound to act in your best interest. Okay, so if the government match idea has this big flaw, what's the alternative? Well, that leads us to a much bigger, you might even say more radical idea, a completely universal vision for how we save for retirement. Pulzer's vision really starts by taking a hard look at the system we have right now. And when you look at who gets the government's help, through tax breaks for retirement savings, it is incredibly unbalanced. Get this, something like 90% of the benefits from these tax subsidies go to higher income folks. Meanwhile, people on the lower end of the pay scale, they get next to nothing. And he doesn't mince words about it either. He calls the way things are now grossly unfair. He basically argues that we have a system that makes wealth inequality worse because it gives the biggest helping hand to the very people who need it the least. So, what's his solution? It's a national retirement system. And here's how it would work. Every single person with a social security number gets an account, basically from birth. This whole thing would be run by an independent board with that all-important fiduciary duty. But here's the real game changer. The government would put money directly into these accounts, and it would be progressive, meaning lower-wage workers would get bigger contributions. And this isn't about getting rid of 401ks or Social Security. It would be an extra layer on top of all that. And I just want to pause on that term for a second, fiduciary duty. It's so important. Think of it like a legal promise. It means that the people managing your money have to, by law, act in your best financial interest, not their own.
It's a way to prevent conflicts of interest and make sure the system is really working for you, the saver.
Now, you might be thinking, the government just giving people money for retirement? That sounds kind of out there. But Paulzer points out that we've actually done something like this before. Congress created a program, sometimes called Trump accounts, that gives a starting fund of $1,000 to certain newborns. So the idea of the government seeding an account directly, the precedent is already there.
All right, so this all brings us to our final section where we look at the path forward. What we've really laid out here are two totally different visions for how we can help create a more secure retirement for every American. When you boil it all down, the real difference is in the philosophy behind each idea. The matching proposal, that's about trying to fix and expand the system we already have. But the universal vision, that's a much bigger leap. It argues that the current system is fundamentally flawed, and what we really need to do is build a whole new foundation, one that's inclusive from the very start.
And that leaves us with the big question that's at the heart of this whole debate. When it comes to solving the retirement crisis, is it enough to just add a few more doors to the house we've already built? Or is the cracks in the foundation so deep that we need to tear it down and build something entirely new from the ground up? The answer to that question is going to shape the financial future for all of us.